Chapter 6, The War on Truth. Before they seize power and establish a world according to their doctrines, totalitarian movements conjure up a lying world of consistency, which is more adequate to the needs of the human mind than reality itself, in which, through sheer imagination, uprooted masses can feel at home and are spared the never-ending shocks which real life and real experiences deal to human beings and their expectations. The force possessed by totalitarian propaganda before the movements have the power to drop iron curtains to prevent anyone's disturbing by the slightest reality the gruesome quiet of an entirely imaginary world lies in its ability to shut the masses off from the real world. Hannah Arendt, The Origins of Totalitarianism. In the middle of the lobby of the 50,000 square foot Creation Museum in Petersburg, Kentucky, tumbles a 20-foot waterfall. Two life-size figures of children with long black hair and wearing buckskin clothes play in the stream a few feet from two towering Tyrannosaurus Rex models that move and roar. The museum has a scale model of Noah's Ark, which shows how dinosaurs fit into the three levels of the vessel, along with other species such as horses, giraffes, hippopotamuses, penguins, and bears. It boasts an elaborate display of the Garden of Eden, in which Adam and Eve, naked but strategically positioned not to show it, swim in a river as dinosaurs and giant lizards roam the banks. Before Adam and Eve were expelled from paradise, museum visitors are informed, all the dinosaurs were peaceable plant eaters. The evidence, they are told, is found in Genesis 1:30, in which God gives green herb to every creature to eat. There were no predators. Only after Adam and Eve sinned and were cast out of paradise did the dinosaurs start to eat flesh. And Adam's sin is a key component of the belief system, for, in the eyes of many creationists, in order for Jesus' death to be meaningful, it had to atone for that sin. The museum has a theatre equipped with seats that shake and gadgets that spray mist at the audience as the story of God's 6-day creation of the world unfolds on the screen, and the sound system rocks the auditorium. There are 30-foot high walls that represent the cliffs of the Grand Canyon, floors that resemble rocks embedded with fossils, and rooms where a Christian paleontologist counters the claim of an evolutionist paleontologist. It has the appearance of a real science museum, complete with a planetarium, a gift shop, and plaques on the wall with quotes from creationist scientists, who have the title Doctor conspicuously before their names. It has charts, timelines, and graphs with facts and figures. It is meant to be interactive, to create, like Universal Studios, a contrived reality with an array of costly animatronic men and women, as well as looming dinosaurs. It is part of the drive to make real a non-reality based world, a world of miracles and magic. We take as our philosophy that the whole museum will prove that God's word is true, says Jean Amt, who leads the tour through the museum. The danger of creationism is not that it allows followers to retreat into a world of certainty and magic, which it does, but that it allows all facts to be accepted or discarded according to the dictates of a preordained ideology. Creationism removes the follower from the rational, reality-based world. Signs, miracles, and wonders occur not only in the daily life of Christians, but also in history, science, medicine, and logic. This belief system becomes the basis for the understanding of the world, and random facts or data are collected and made fit into the belief system. If facts can't be made to fit, they are discarded or treated as misguided opinions. When facts are treated as if they were opinions, there is no universal standard by which to determine truth in law, in science, in scholarship, or in the reporting of events of the day. The world becomes a place where lies become true, where people can believe what they want to believe, where there is no possibility of reaching any conclusion not predetermined by those who interpret the official, divinely inspired text. The museum illustrates the movement's marriage of primitive intolerance with the modern tools of technology, mass communication, sophisticated fundraising, and political organization. Totalitarian systems usually start as propaganda movements that ostensibly teach people that to believe what they want. But the opening gambit is a ruse. This insistence on the primacy of personal opinion, regardless of facts, destabilizes and destroys the primacy of all fact. This process leads inevitably to the big lie. Facts are useful only if they bolster the message. The use of mass marketing techniques to persuade rather than brainwash allows millions of followers to accept the toxic totalitarian line, having been tricked into believing in their own. Ironically, at the outset of the movement, seemingly encourages people to think independently or courageously. It presents its ideology of creationism repackaged as intelligent design, as an alternative to Darwinian theories of evolution. The power of these non-reality-based movements is that they appeal to our deepest held, most primitive prejudices, our classism, sexism, racism, perversions based on fear of complexity or change. So the propaganda contains much of what we already yearn to believe. Its subversive message is that it's okay to believe what we want, to believe lies. In the promulgation of the totalitarian belief system, at first we are told we all have the right to an opinion. In short, a right to believe anything. Soon, under the iron control of an empowered totalitarian movement, facts become worthless, kept or discarded according to an ideological litmus test. Lies become true, and once the totalitarians are in power, facts are ruthlessly manipulated or kept hidden to support the lie. Hannah Arendt called the principle behind this process nihilistic relativism. The goal of creationism is not to offer an alternative. Its goal is the destruction of the core values of the open society. The ability to think for oneself, to draw independent conclusions, to express dissent when judgment and common sense tell you something is wrong, to be self-critical, to challenge authority, to advocate for change, and to accept that there are other views, different ways of being that are morally or socially acceptable. The museum will cost an estimated $25 million. It is the work of Ken Ham, a school teacher, one of the country's leading creationists. Other creationist museums are going up in Arkansas, Texas, California, Tennessee, and Florida. The museum is part of a massive push to teach creationism in schools, championed by a vast Christian publishing and filmmaking industry that seeks to rewrite the past and make it conform to the Bible. The front lines of the culture wars are the classrooms, and the battle is one reality-based educators are slowly losing. 20 states are considering changing the way evolution is taught in order to include creationism or intelligent design. Intelligent design has been the code word of the movement since the Supreme Court ruled in the 1987 Edwards v. Aguillard case that creationism cannot be taught in public schools. Intelligent design argues that the slow process of evolution could not have produced something as complex as the living cell. Rather, life was created by an intelligent agent. One the proponents of the intelligent design are carefully to specify is unknown, in order to skirt the judicial ban on creationism. Several states, including Pennsylvania, now have state education charters requiring that students be taught the evidence both for and against evolution, although there is no scientific evidence against it. And many Americans buy into the myth. When asked for their views on human origins, only 13% of respondents in a 2004 Gallup poll said life arose from the strictly natural process of evolution. More than 38% believed that God guided evolution, and 45% said the Genesis account of creation was a true story. Courses on intelligent design have been taught at the universities of Minnesota, Georgia, New Mexico, and Iowa State, along with Wake Forest and Carnegie Mellon, not to mention Christian universities that teach all science through the prism of the Bible. When Charles Lyell's Principles of Geology was published in 1830 to 1833, it challenged the prevailing views of how Earth had been formed. Lyle questioned the assumption that unique catastrophes or supernatural events, such as Noah's flood, shaped Earth's surface. He wrote that a once tumultuous period of change had slowed to today's calmer, more leisurely pace. The date of the Earth's sudden creation, up until then, had been widely accepted as 4004 BC, based on the creation story in Genesis. When Charles Darwin published The Origin of Species in 1859, his findings further eroded the biblical account of creation. Lyell's and Darwin's works were catastrophic for biblical literalists. Evolution and natural selection shattered the comfortable worldview of many Christians who saw themselves as created in the image of God. Evolution reduced the human race to the status of a species, one descended from primates. The scientific accounts of creation and the origin of species became, in the eyes of fundamentalist believers, the materialist foundation for the human race's moral and cultural decline. It dethroned Christians from their self-constructed platform of moral and ethical superiority. It challenged the belief that God intervenes in human affairs to protect and guide believers. The ideological pillars of literalist Christianity, which viewed the universe as revolving around and serving the interests of anointed Christians, were destroyed. Literalist Christians believed that death did not exist before Adam and Eve were expelled from the Garden of Eden for disobeying God. Death and suffering were introduced by God as a punishment for living in a sinful, fallen world. Jesus' suffering and crucifixion, however, atoned for Adam's sin and made possible a return to a deathless paradise. But if the Darwinian account of evolution is correct, then death and suffering were always and always will be part of human existence. Evolution implicitly challenges the possibility of miracles, the second coming of Christ, the resurrection, and an apocalyptic end to human existence, in which the saved are lifted up into heaven. For believers who have found in the certitude of Christian fundamentalism a shelter from despair, a despair that threatens to consume them again if they return to a reality-based world, evolution is terrifying. The miracles they insist they see performed around them, the presence of their guiding, comforting hand of God in their lives, the notion that there is a divine destiny specially ordained for them, crumbles into dust under the cold glare of evolution. Evolution posits what they fear most, a morally neutral universe. It obliterates the fantastic constructs of their belief system, and the steady efforts by creationists to erode the authority of evolution and discredit Darwin are, because of all this, unrelenting and fierce. Unlike the animals, mammals included, man is an immortal being who will live somewhere forever, reads a passage in Biology, God's Living Creation, a creationist textbook popular in Christian high schools. Human beings are discussed in isolation from other mammals, and brief passages interrupt the chapters with headings such as Wonders of the Human Hand. Only an omnipotent and all-wise God could have designed and created the human hand. Students read, Computers can never think, students are told, because no machine will ever know satisfaction at discovering God's truth. The textbook, with an index of scripture references, states that according to the laws of probability, the probability that evolution occurred is essentially zero. Yet evolutionists believe sincerely that it did somehow happen. We marvel at their faith in the impossible. Creationist publications such as this one blame Darwin for spawning most of the evils of modernity, including racism, apartheid, Stalinism, the Holocaust, and the Rwandan genocide. It was evolution, the textbook states, that exploded into a worldwide philosophy of kill or be killed, as expressed by Adolf Hitler and the proponents of the religion of communism. Darwinism is usually presented as mentally unbalanced and sadistic. An article put out by the California-based Institute for Creation Research is typical. Was Charles Darwin psychotic? A study of his mental health. Believers are told that Darwin and all evolutionists were behind the genocides unleashed by all modern tyrants, from Hitler and Stalin to Pol Pot. and Christians must be prepared for battle, for war against satanic forces that lie incubating within Americans' secular, evolutionist, materialistic, godless society. Forces getting ready to begin a new round of mass exterminations, this time of American Christians. Darwin, students learn, suffered from deep depression, alienation, and constant illness and physical pain. Once he defied God and published his work. He could not escape divine wrath. He lost all interest in the higher things of life, the things about man that can only be explained by his being a creature. God made in the image of God. Made in the image of God, the textbook reads. He lost his love for poetry, music, and literature, and of course, he could not pray. And yet, coming from the modern age, the fundamentalists cannot discount science. They employ jargon, methods, and data that appear like science to make an argument for creationism. They have created research and scholarly institutions designed to parallel legitimate scientific organizations. They pump out articles in self-published journals to provide evidence that homosexuals can be cured, that global warming is a myth, that abortion can cause breast cancer, that something they call post-abortion syndrome leads to deep depression and suicide, and that abstinence-only education is an effective form of birth control. Bogus and unsubstantiated claims, all in the service of the ideology, are dressed up to look scientific. This pseudoscience seeps into the public debate, disseminated by a nervous media anxious to give both sides of every argument. Those with contempt for facts and truth, for honest research and inquiry, are given the same platform as those who deal in a world of reality, fact, and rationality. The movement's leaders dress up this ideology as scientific to discredit real science. They have created a fundamentalist science. They cannot return to the pre-Darwinian innocence that let their predecessors believe the Bible alone was enough. They need, in the midst of their flight from reality, to be reassured that science not contaminated by secular humanists and non-believers, is on their side. In this, they are a distinctly modern movement. They need the imprint of science and scholarship to legitimize myth. This is a characteristic they share with all modern totalitarian movements, which work hard to co-opt the disciplines of law, science, medicine, and scholarship, to give their primitive and superstitious belief systems that allow the rulers to dictate reality and truth, a modern veneer. The para-professional organizations formed by the Christian right, organizations of teachers, journalists, doctors, lawyers, and scientists, mimic the activities of traditional professional groups in which the focus is the profession and not the faith. They seek to challenge the legitimacy and power of these traditional organizations. The duplication of the structures and methods employed by the non-totalitarian world, as Arendt wrote, proved extremely fruitful in the work of undermining actively existing institutions and in the decomposition of the status quo, which totalitarian organizations invariably prefer to an open show of force. The Creation Museum presents the creationist argument that Adam and Eve were human beings and that God created everything on earth in 6 24-hour days. Adherents to this worldview do not believe that the earth has existed for millions of years, or that the first living cell appeared 3.5 billion years ago, or that the dinosaurs roamed the planet for 160 million years before becoming extinct. Their reign ending abruptly, they scoff at the notion that the dinosaurs could, as biologists suggest, be the ancestors of birds. Instead they embrace a strict 6,000-year chronology of the Bible. Men and dinosaurs coexisted and were created during the same 6-day cycle, wholly and fully evolved. When the biblical flood covered the earth, dinosaurs, along with other species, were sheltered on Noah's Ark. The rest of the dinosaurs were drowned in the flood. And this, as the museum's exhibits explain, accounts for the vast tracts of fossilized dinosaur bones. Animals on the Ark, including the dinosaurs, repopulated after disembarking. But environmental changes meant that the dinosaurs could not adapt and died off. The biblical accounts of sea monsters, leviathans and behemoths are, according to the museum's display, references to dinosaurs. They do not give credence to the concept of the Big Bang, because Genesis states that God created waters and earth on the third day, and the sun, moon and stars on the fourth day. It is a story hardly more credible than the fantasy of a child, but it fulfills a powerful emotional need. The Bible tells us that God created all of the land animals on the sixth day of creation. A brochure from the museum reads, "As dinosaurs were land animals, they must have been made on this day, alongside Adam and Eve, who were also created on day 6. If God designed and created dinosaurs, they would have been fully functional, designed to do what they were created for, and would have been 100% dinosaur. This fits exactly with the evidence from the fossil record." The museum devotes much of its space to trumpeting what it insists are discrepancies in the scientific research for the origins of life. The dearth of fossil ancestors for major life forms after the Cambrian explosion about 550 million years ago, for example, is used by creationists to discredit evolution, although science furnishes a range of persuasive explanations for the paucity of fossils. For example, that primitive life form before the Cambrian period lacked body parts and could have been fossilized. The fact that we have any fossils of larger life forms is an amazing piece of luck, since they can exist only in quite scientific geologic conditions. But all this is used against science, and a mantra of creationists, one the museum guide repeats a few times, is, "God is not a God of gaps." The creationists act and look like scientists. They couch their language in the jargon of science. They say they can disprove the theory of evolution with facts and evidence. They talk of research and data. It is not enough these days to argue that God wrote the story of creation and therefore it is true. The movement needs the veneer of science. This is the goal of the museum. Science will prove the biblical account of creation and the literal interpretation of the Bible. Creationism must be defended in a scientific manner, with scientific conclusions disproving the theory of evolution and supporting the words of the Bible. Once the science of creationism is accepted, the Bible reigns as the undisputed Word of God and the sole arbiter of truth. Leaders who interpret the Bible must be obeyed. Creationism is a key part of the system, aimed at building a society that relinquishes the capacity to examine itself. Museum displays say there is no proof that fossils are millions of years old. Evolution in the hands of creationists becomes just another unsubstantiated story about the past, since no scientist was there to see the dinosaurs live through this supposed dinosaur age. Some people think that dinosaurs were too big, or there were too many of them to go in this ark, a museum display reads. It goes on to explain that in fact there were very few different kinds of dinosaurs, and that then there is the speculation that perhaps not all the dinosaurs were fully grown when they mounted Noah's gangplank, even though there was ample room in the huge ship for large animals. The museum material explains, perhaps God sent young animals into the ark that still had plenty of room for them to grow. We stand in a display room called the Dig Site. In front of us is a replica of a pit with the recreation of fossilized bones of the dinosaur. The room is meant to explore, from the biblical perspective, the work of paleontologists. The paleontologist creates a story based on her assumption about millions of years of Earth history, with the help of artists and sculptors, reads the sign over the dig site. She transforms the story into believable history that appears in films, books, and papers. The room shows how the false assumptions of evolutionary scientists end up as facts in our public schools and museums. This pseudoscience is part of a wider assault on all scientific studies that challenge the radical fundamentalist worldview. There are Christian scientists who challenge research regarding global warming, AIDS, and pregnancy prevention. Christian right organizations such as the Traditional Values Coalition, whose founder Paul Cameron once called for AIDS leper colonies, are lobbying to end all programs by the National Institutes of Health related to HIV infection. Members of the Christian right positioned inside government agencies have worked to discredit or silence research by public health officials and censored data that conflict with the radical fundamentalist vision, especially regarding birth control. Self-appointed Christian experts produce glossy studies to displace genuine research. Joe McElhenney, one of the most prominent compilers of this pseudoscience, has published a brochure, Why Condoms Aren't Safe, which uses discredited science to prove that condoms do not work. The number of pseudoscientists peddling falsehoods inside the government is part of what triggered the Union of Concerned Scientists in March 2004 to write in its report, Scientific Integrity in Policy Making, there is significant evidence that the scope and scale of the manipulation, suppression, and misrepresentation of science by the Bush administration are unprecedented. World-renowned scientific institutions such as the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and the National Institutes of Health take decades to build a team of world-class scientific expertise and talent, but they can be severely damaged in short order by the scientifically unethical behavior, such as that displayed by the current administration. One of the final displays in the museum shows how a contemporary family experiences daily life without God. It portrays a household in disarray, with fights and teenage drug use. Licentiousness, alcohol abuse, and the breakdown of parental authority are tied to the failure to believe in the creation myth. In this gloomy section of the museum, there is also a darkened, graffiti-covered alley and a sign that asks, what happens when absolute authority is eliminated and man's opinion is the only measure of good and evil? A walk through an inner city alley is the backdrop for a virtual and auditory display of the horrors of a culture that had made man's opinion the final authority in life, another sign reads. These displays depict women and men out of control, hooked on drugs, sexually promiscuous, suffering in the stench of a modern Sodom and Gomorrah. Numerous books purport to offer scientific evidence to back up creationism, including the 550-page The Genesis Flood, co-authored by Henry N. Morris and John Whitcomb. The book, published in 1961, has gone through 40 printings and is the movement's opening manifesto. The first assault by creationists against evolution from a scientific position. It seeks to lay out evidence to support the biblical account of creation, attacking an array of research methods that are usually obscure to the lay reader, such as the modern methods of radiometric dating. The authors write off modern research tools as unreliable and trumpet contradictory studies within the scientific community about issues such as the age of the Earth. The heavy use of the scientific jargon gives the work a scholarly appearance. Whitcomb, a graduate of Princeton where he arrived in 1942 as a godless evolutionist, had a conversion experience as a freshman. He interrupted college to serve in the army in World War II, including the Battle of the Bulge, and returned to complete his degree and attend Grace Theological Seminary. He stayed at the seminary for nearly 40 years to teach Old Testament. He has spent his life peddling creationism. Soft-spoken, good-humored, he rattles off his theories with the aid of an overhead projector that shows timelines for the account of creation, diagrams of the planets, and measurements of Noah's Ark. The morning I find him in Independence, Missouri, his audience is made up of several hundred Christian school teachers from Midwestern states. They take notes and laugh as he pokes fun at or appears to puncture the research of secular scientists. The audience at times is giddy with excitement. Whitcomb assures the teachers that they will be amassing the scientific ammunition to demolish the work of geologists, biologists, and paleontologists who dismiss the creation account in the Bible. Now you say, Lord, you don't really expect intelligent, scientifically minded people to believe that the whole universe was created in 6 days, do you? Whitcomb asks. And God says, dear reader, I've written a chapter in the Bible called Genesis 1, and it's called A Time Block, which means it is not fluffy, frothy, and cannot be manipulated, stretched, or accommodated. Whitcomb brings up some of the stickier problems in Genesis, such as the account that God created light on the first day and the sun on the fourth day. He posits that God created a temporary light until the sun was formed. The reason for this, Whitcomb explains, is that God wanted to abolish the cult of sun worship. And don't think for 1 minute America has abandoned sun worship. Either in public school textbooks, which starts this way on how the world began billions of years ago, solar radiation bathed the primeval seas and somehow activated lifeless chemicals and coalesced them into highly complex, self-reproducing organisms that have evolved under solar radiation for billions of years. And as long as the sun keeps shining, life will continue. And when the sun dies out, life ends. What you've just heard was a sun worship service. Friends, Whitcomb concludes, it took no work at all for Jesus to do this. But astronomers in their debates and arguments on a horizontal, rationalistic level will never discover the correct answer. Don't expect any textbooks in any university, as long as the world goes on as it is, to ever come to the right conclusion. Only the infallible, inspired, inerrant, unique, written revelation of God has the answers. The lecture is met with rapturous applause. The teachers close their notebooks, and several hurry forward to ask more questions or buy books, many by Whitcomb on the table outside the door. Secular seminars are being held by creationists around the country. On an April night at Penview Christian School in Souderton, Pennsylvania, about half hour outside Philadelphia, Dr. Jason Lyle, who works for the Creation Museum, sets up his slide projector for a lecture. He begins his presentation by disabusing the audience of about 150 people, mostly students, teachers, and parents, of the notion that dinosaurs were frightful creatures. God didn't make monsters, he says, explaining his theory of the dinosaur's diet. The first T-Rex would have eaten plants. Dinosaurs, along with all animals, originally were vegetarians. People say, wait a minute, but T-Rex has those incredibly sharp teeth. And indeed, T-Rex had 6-inch serrated fangs, perfectly designed for ripping and tearing into watermelons, and cantaloupes and cabbages and all kinds of fruits. You see, you think of a watermelon as soft, but in order to get to the soft stuff on the inside, you have to cut through the hard outer exterior. But not T-Rex. He was quite ready to eat it off the vine. Lyle shows fanciful slides to the audience of raptors and stegosauruses outfitted with saddles, a caveman fighting an infant T-Rex, and Adam and Eve strolling in the Garden of Eden alongside Triceratops. Dinosaurs were docile, gentle when they first were created, says Lyle. All life's animals would have been gentle when they were first created. People say, wait a minute, wouldn't T-Rex try to eat people? Try to eat Adam and Eve? Lyle asks. But he blames the question on anti-God, humanistic-based evolution movies like Jurassic Park. I'm not saying it's wrong for you to see movies like that, but you need to think about things when you watch movies like that. How do I process this from the biblical worldview? Is this really accurate? He tells the students he did not admit he was a creationist to his professors at Ohio Wesleyan or at Colorado, where he received his PhD in astrophysics. He speaks of the dilemma faced by creationists at secular schools, urging that students not come out until after graduate school. Some professors will just stop you from getting your PhD if you're a creationist. Lyle's final image on the screen shows a small church with a cross on its roof. Next to it is a large white cross. The large cross has the words, "The Church," emblazoned on it. A network of white tree roots labeled creation secures the church to the earth. Lyle explains that secular science is attacking the biblical view of creation. In his drawing is a salvo of cruise missiles with phrases ape equals man, millions of years, and evolution printed on their sides as they head into an arch toward the roots. These attacks, he says, are aimed to bring down the cross, to destroy the church. He shows a slide picturing a small hut with a radar dish on the roof. The hut is labeled Answers in Genesis, the church's early warning system. He flips to a new slide. The church begins firing lasers emitted from its cross at the incoming missiles. The cascade of laser beams strikes the missiles, causing them and their blasphemies to erupt into flames. Come to the cross and be saved, proclaims the final slide. All attempts to seek truth, however elusive and difficult, challenge the blind obedience and suppression of conscience championed by those who teach one truth and one way of being. When one truth is allowed, empirical data becomes irrelevant. Intellectual, scientific, and moral inquiry becomes unnecessary. In this worldview, followers are robbed of the capacity to think. The lies, however enormous and absurd, defy criticism, and unmasking, because the rational world is discredited and finally silenced, the Creation Museum, standing with its imposing pillars, its sea of parking lots for school buses, 52 acres of groomed landscaping, pond, looping nature trails, animatronic dinosaurs, and Christian paleontologist, presages a society where truth is banished. Thank you for listening.